Your job is costing you more than it pays. Carl Jung observed that the face we put on for work in the morning can slowly become the only face we own by evening. There is a line from Goethe that Jung returned to again and again across his writing life. From Faust, "Two souls, alas, dwell within my breast. One soul climbs the ladder at the office, wins the account, takes the title, earns the corner desk, and the other soul, quieter, older, waits at home for a self that keeps not arriving." Goethe was not writing about careers, but Jung heard in those two souls the exact shape of what happens to a modern person who spends 30 years becoming a job. One soul gets paid, the other soul goes hungry, and here is the part that stops you if you let it. The hungry soul does not send a complaint, it simply goes quiet, and a quiet soul is not a healed soul, it is a starved one, wearing a good suit. And if you have ever sat in your car in your own driveway after work, engine off, not yet ready to go inside, not sure why, that stillness was not nothing. That was the hungry soul finally getting a moment where nobody was asking it to perform. So let me say plainly what this means for you. 3 things. Quietly. To yourself. I see the mask I have been wearing to work every morning. I see what that mask has actually cost me to keep polished, and I choose to know the difference between the role I perform and the self underneath it. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. Again. I make the unconscious conscious. If something in what I just said landed somewhere real, consider subscribing, so that tomorrow's teaching has a way of reaching you too. Before the first key, if any part of you just went still, type the 2 words, "face it," in the comments. Let it be a small, honest marker that you are willing to look. The first key is that the job was only ever supposed to be a mask, not a face. And this is not a small distinction. Jung called this mask the persona, borrowing the word directly from the masks worn by actors on the ancient stage. A persona is not a lie exactly. It is a negotiation. It is the face you agree to show the office, so that the office can agree to keep paying you. And every functioning adult needs one. A persona is not the problem. You need a version of yourself that can sit through a budget meeting without saying what you actually think, that can shake a difficult client's hand, that can show up on a Monday looking more composed than you feel. This is not weakness. This is civilization. Think for a moment about how naturally you already do this. You speak to your boss in one register, to your mother in another, to a stranger on the train in a third, and none of that is dishonest. It is simply the mask fitted to the room. But Jung watched people slowly stop remembering that the mask was a mask at all. He watched the boundary between the worn face and the real face dissolve, until a person could not tell you, if you asked them quietly, who they would be without the title on the door. Picture an ordinary work dinner, the kind with name tags and small plates of food nobody really eats. Go around that table and listen to how people introduce themselves. I am the regional director. I run operations for the Northeast. I am in finance. 5 sentences in, and not one person has said a true thing about themselves. They have said a true thing about their function, and nobody at the table even notices the substitution, because everyone there is fluent in the same trade. Now imagine a woman who has spent 15 years being the reliable one at her company, the one who never drops a ball. She is good at it. She is even proud of it. But ask her one evening what she wants, not what the role wants, not what the next promotion requires, but what she wants. And watch how long the silence lasts. That silence is not laziness, and it is not confusion. It is the sound of a mask that has quietly started answering questions the self used to answer on its own. Notice how it works, even in the small hours of an ordinary week. The way you answer your phone in a different voice, when it is your manager, instead of your sister. The way you catch yourself rehearsing an email 3 times for tone before sending it to someone who could fire you. The way you laugh a half-second too quickly at a joke from someone with authority over your paycheck. And none of that is wrong on its own. A mask fitted well to its room is simply good craftsmanship. The trouble starts only when the room follows you home, when the rehearsed voice becomes the only voice left in the house at night. When you notice you cannot finish a sentence to your own family without first checking how it would sound in a meeting. When your own child asks you a simple question at dinner and you find yourself answering the way you would answer a junior colleague. Measured, careful, faintly instructive. Your job is costing you more than it pays whenever the answer to "who are you" starts arriving in job titles instead of in you, and that is the door the second key walks through. I wear the mask does not wear me. The second key is that identification is the actual disease, not the job itself. Jung wrote it with a plainness that still lands. The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. Read that twice, because the trap is not that you have a persona, the trap is that you have started to believe it is you. Jung used the example of a professor who becomes so thoroughly identified with his own textbook that he can no longer distinguish his opinions from the discipline he teaches. Ask him a question outside his field, and watch the confusion, not because he lacks intelligence, but because the man and the role fused somewhere along the way, and there is very little man left to consult. Now bring that home. Imagine a man named nothing in particular, an ordinary manager at an ordinary company, who is asked at a family dinner what he thinks about a film everyone else just watched. And he answers the way he would answer in a strategy meeting, weighing pros and cons, summarizing, staying neutral, and his own sister laughs and says, "Just tell us if you liked it," and he genuinely cannot, not right away, because the part of him that simply likes or dislikes things without managing the room has not been exercised in years. That is identification, quiet, unannounced. And it never arrives as a single dramatic moment. It arrives the way rust arrives, one unused morning at a time. Think of the manager who cannot sit at a dinner table without steering the conversation the way he steers a meeting. Think of the nurse who cannot let a friend struggle for 30 seconds without fixing it, because fixing is the only self she still has access to. Think even of a retail worker who spends 8 hours a day being pleasant to strangers on command, and who finds, at her own birthday dinner surrounded by people who love her, that she is still performing pleasantness, still monitoring her tone, still smiling on schedule, rather than because anything in her actually wants to smile. This is not devotion to a craft. Devotion to a craft leaves room for a person underneath it. This is something closer to a slow replacement, one Tuesday at a time. You answer to your title before you answer to your name. You introduce yourself at a party with your job before anything true about you, and nobody at the party even notices, because everyone else is doing the same trade. Notice too how it creeps into the body. Not just the words, the handshake that never quite loosens, the smile that holds its shape a beat too long after the joke has passed, the voice that keeps its meeting register even in the car alone afterward, as if no one ever told it the meeting had ended, the shoulders that stay pulled back in professional posture even at home on the sofa, as if the body itself has forgotten it is allowed to slouch. Your job is costing you more than it pays whenever the transaction quietly reverses, when the mask stops representing you and starts requiring you to represent it. And if that unsettles you, good, because the next key is where Jung shows you exactly what a life built entirely on the mask starts to look like from the inside. I am not my title, I only borrowed it. The third key is that Jung did not learn this from a patient file. He learned it first from his own childhood, and it is worth slowing down here, because the story is not abstract. Jung recalled in Memories, Dreams, Reflections that as a boy, he became aware of two distinct personalities living inside him. He called them simply number one and number two. Number one was the schoolboy, ordinary, a little uncertain, doing his lessons, trying to fit into a Swiss village. Number two was older, stranger, connected to something vast and historical that number one could not have named if you had asked him. Jung did not resolve this by choosing one and discarding the other. He learned, slowly, painfully, to let both live, and later, looking back as a grown man with decades of clinical work behind him, he wrote about a related danger he had seen again and again in his patients, that a persona sustained for years without relief becomes what he called an artificial personality maintained without punishment, meaning the mask no longer costs anything at the front door. You get away with it, everyone believes it, you believe it. But Jung's whole point was that nothing in the psyche is ever free. The bill does not vanish just because it stops arriving in the mail. It moves underground, and what moves underground does not disappear, it waits. Think of it the way you might think of a bank account you never check. The money is not gone. It is only unattended, and unattended things do not stay neutral. They either grow or they rot. This is why a person can spend 20 years as the dependable one, the competent one, the one who never falls apart, and feel, in some unreachable back room of themselves, a low persistent flatness that no raise or promotion ever quite touches. That flatness is not a mood. Jung would say, it is arithmetic. It is the unlived life quietly presenting its invoice. Picture an ordinary Tuesday for a person like this, 6 in the morning, already reaching for the phone before the eyes are fully open, checking for anything urgent overnight. 7 in the morning, already rehearsing the calm, competent tone for the 9 o'clock call. 9 o'clock, performing certainty about a decision they privately doubt. 11, absorbing a piece of criticism from a superior with a nod and a thank you, while something in the stomach tightens and says nothing. Noon, eating lunch at their desk because stepping away might look like weakness. 2 in the afternoon, drafting an email 3 separate times to make sure it cannot be misread as anything other than calm. 3 in the afternoon, absorbing a colleague's frustration without letting a flicker of their own irritation show. 5, one more call. 6 in the evening, driving home and realizing they cannot remember one true feeling they had all day, that they can list every meeting but not one moment that was actually theirs. Now widen the lens. Imagine a schoolteacher who has spent 18 years being the patient one in front of 30 children a day. Patient at 8 in the morning, patient at recess duty, patient through the parent phone call at 4 in the afternoon, and patient again at the dinner table with her own family. Because patience, by then, is the only gear she has left. She is not lying to anyone. The patience is real, but it was borrowed from a well that was never refilled. And a well that is never refilled eventually shows the bottom. That is not a busy day, and it is not a virtuous life running smoothly. Jung would say, that is a life almost entirely spent in costume. And a costume, worn long enough without ever being taken off in private, starts to feel like skin, until taking it off feels less like relief and more like disappearing. The tragedy Jung kept pointing at was never that the mask was worn, it was that it was worn without witness. No evening moment, no quiet accounting, no number 2 allowed even a small room to exist in, and so the debt simply compounded in the dark, where no one, least of all the person paying it, was watching. I will not pay my whole life for one role. The fourth key is what happens the day the mask is finally taken away from you, whether by retirement, by a layoff, by illness, by simple time. And this is where the arithmetic from the third key finally comes due in full. Imagine a man, strong for decades, the one everyone at the firm called indestructible, the one who trained half the department and outlasted 3 different bosses. He retires with a party, a plaque, kind words, and within 18 months, he is a different creature entirely, not because his body failed him, but because the moment the title was removed, there was almost nothing standing behind it. He had spent so completely on the mask that when the mask was set down, the face underneath had gone soft from decades of disuse. And notice what he says in that first empty year. If you ask him, he does not say, I miss the work. He says something closer to, I do not know what to do with my mornings, which is a different sentence entirely. That sentence is the sound of a self-discovering, too late to plan for it, that it was never given a chance to grow its own mornings. Now imagine a different case. Not a retirement, but a sudden layoff. A woman in her 40s, let go on a Tuesday with a severance envelope and a box for her desk items. She had built her entire sense of worth on being indispensable at that company, and for the first 2 weeks, she cannot sleep past 5. She wakes at the hour she always woke for that job. gets halfway dressed for a meeting that no longer exists, and stands in her kitchen not knowing what a Tuesday is supposed to feel like without a title organizing it. She finds herself refreshing her old work email out of habit before remembering she no longer has access. This is not weakness, Jung would say. This is a person meeting, for the first time in years, the actual size of the self that was left when the borrowed clothing came off. Illness does the same thing, more slowly, more mercilessly. A diagnosis that removes a person from their desk for months forces the same question that retirement forces in an instant. Who are you when the job cannot answer for you? Lying in a hospital bed with no meetings to attend and no emails to answer, a person can discover, with something close to shock, how little of themselves they had actually been keeping in reserve. And even simple time does it. The quiet erosion of relevance that comes as younger colleagues rise and older ones are gently moved aside. The slow realization that the phone rings less, that you are consulted less, that the room no longer turns toward you first. Your job is costing you more than it pays, whenever the price is a self that will only announce its absence the day the job disappears. And here is the quiet mercy inside this key. You do not have to wait for a severance envelope, or a retirement party, or a diagnosis to find out what is underneath your mask. You can go looking now, gently, on your own terms, while there is still time and still ordinary Tuesdays left to build a self that can survive the removal of a title. When the mask comes off, I will still be there. If this kind of teaching has been good company for you tonight, consider staying. Tomorrow's key will find you here if you subscribe now. The fifth key is the deepest one, and it comes in 3 pieces, so take your time with it. First, consider what Jung actually asked of people who came to him worried they had lost themselves inside their careers. He did not tell them to quit their jobs. He did not romanticize dropping out. What he asked for instead was a kind of honest inventory, a mask census, and you can do a version of it right now. Pause for a moment and pick one real hour from this past week. Not a dramatic hour, an ordinary one, a commute, a meeting, a dinner where you talked mostly about work, and ask yourself plainly, in that hour, who was actually present? Was it you, or was it the version of you that your paycheck requires? Imagine a school teacher doing this same exercise on a Sunday evening. She picks Tuesday's staff meeting, and she notices that she nodded at a decision she privately disagreed with, not because she was convinced, but because the role required agreeableness more than it required honesty. She writes this down without judging herself for it, because Jung taught that the mask only turns dangerous in the dark. In full daylight, it becomes something you can actually hold in your hand and examine, rather than something wearing you without your knowledge. Imagine a small business owner doing the same census on his drive home. He realizes he has not spoken in his own natural voice since breakfast. Every sentence since 8 in the morning was calibrated for a customer, a supplier, or an employee who needed reassurance. This is not hypocrisy. It is simply unexamined weight, and weight that is never examined only grows heavier. Imagine one more, a young man working the phones at a call center, 8 hours a day of the same trained cheerfulness, the same trained patience, the same trained apology. And one evening his own girlfriend asks him a simple question over dinner, and he hears himself answer in the exact soft-managed tone he uses for an angry caller. And something in him goes cold at the sound of it. That coldness is not weakness. It is the first honest moment of the whole week, because for 1 second he heard the mask speaking instead of him. And hearing it is the beginning of no longer confusing the two. Imagine yet another example. A delivery driver who spends his whole shift performing a brisk, friendly efficiency for customers who barely look up from their phones, and who sits in his own driveway at the end of the day, engine still running, unable for a moment to remember what his own unhurried voice even sounds like, because he has not used it since sunrise. Second, consider what the persona is actually built from. It is not built from nothing. Jung was careful about this. The mask is assembled out of real skills, real competence, real years of practice. The surgeon's steady hands in an operating room did not come from vanity, they came from training, and long nights and genuine care. The customer service worker's patient voice on the phone did not come from falseness. It came from a genuine discipline of holding steady for someone else's bad day. So the goal is never to despise the mask or tear it off in some dramatic act of rebellion that would only leave you cold and unprotected in a world that still requires you to show up for meetings. The goal is relationship. Can you put the mask on in the morning the way you put on a coat? Useful, warm, appropriate to the weather outside, and take it off again in the evening, the way you take off a coat, without confusing the coat for your own skin. Notice how differently a coat behaves from a second skin. A coat can be hung by the door. A coat can be forgotten in the closet all weekend without you feeling the smallest bit less yourself. But a second skin cannot be removed at all. Think of a diver climbing out of the water after a long dive. The wetsuit served him well below the surface. It kept him warm. It let him work. But no sane diver walks into his own kitchen that evening, still zipped into it. He peels it off, hangs it to dry, and sits down to dinner as himself. That is the whole difference Jung was pointing toward. A persona that can be hung by the door at the end of the day is doing its job well. A persona that follows you into the kitchen, into your marriage, into the quiet of your own bedroom, has stopped being a tool and started being a jailer. And the frightening part is how gently that happens. No one decides one morning to never take the coat off again. It simply gets left on one evening because you were tired, and then another evening because you were tired again. And slowly the habit of taking it off stops being a habit at all, until one day, years later, you reach for the zipper out of some old memory of comfort and find your own hand has forgotten exactly where it is. Third, and this is the piece that Jung returned to most seriously in his later work, consider what waits on the other side of the mask when you finally look. Because it is not nothing. It is not an empty room. Jung believed that underneath the socially negotiated face, there is an entire undeveloped life waiting. Talents you set aside at 22 because they did not pay well. Curiosities you closed the door on because they did not fit the resume. A whole interior landscape that the job never asked to see, and so you stopped showing it, even to yourself. This is the real meaning of the title of this video. Your job is costing you more than it pays, not because the job is evil. Most jobs are not evil, but because every hour spent exclusively feeding the mask is an hour not spent feeding the rest of you, and that debt compounds quietly for years without ever once appearing on a pay stub. Think of the accountant who used to paint and has not touched a brush in 11 years. Think of the operations manager who used to write long letters to friends and now cannot remember the last time he wrote anything that was not a status update. Imagine a warehouse supervisor who once played the violin every evening as a young man, and who now, at 46, cannot say with certainty where the instrument even is in his own house. Imagine his wife finding it by accident while cleaning a closet, dust across the case, one string gone slack, and setting it down again quickly because neither of them quite knows what to say about it. Imagine, too, a woman who once kept a garden every spring in her 20s, hands in the dirt before work, and who now, 20 years into a demanding career, drives past other people's gardens on her way home and feels a small, unnamed ache she has never had time to investigate. None of this shows up in a performance review. None of this shows up in a raise. And that is exactly why Jung insisted the inventory has to be done deliberately, on purpose, by you. Because no manager is ever going to ask you what your soul has been doing while you were busy being reliable. This is not a call to abandon your career in some grand gesture. Jung was suspicious of grand gestures. He trusted the small, honest looking. The evening where you actually ask yourself what you did today that was truly yours. The notebook page where you write down one thing you used to love, that the job quietly displaced. And here is what makes this piece different from mere nostalgia. The point is not to mourn the violin, or the letters, or the paintbrush, or the garden. The point is to notice that the part of you capable of loving those things did not die. It only went quiet, waiting the way a seed waits under frost. A seed under frost is not dead. It is simply unattended. It does not need drama. It does not need a total change of career or a leap into some new identity built as quickly and carelessly as the last one. It needs one small, honest act of attention. Repeated. The violin taken out for 10 minutes on a Sunday. The letter written instead of the message. The walk taken without a phone in hand, so an old curiosity has room to speak again. The garden begun again in a single pot on a windowsill, if that is all the space or time allows. This is slow work, unglamorous work, the kind that produces nothing you could put on a resume. But it is the only work that actually settles the bill, instead of letting it keep compounding in the dark room behind the mask. I hold my mask consciously, and I hold myself more consciously still. The sixth key is the mercy at the end of all this, and it is simple enough to carry with you tomorrow morning when the alarm goes off. The mask was never the enemy. Jung was clear about this distinction, his whole working life. The persona is the part of you that pretends, temporarily, usefully, for good reason. The shadow is the part of you that refuses to look at all. These are not the same failure, and confusing them is how people end up either despising their careers entirely or drowning in them without a shred of self left over. Imagine a schoolteacher who has worn the same steady, patient face in front of children for 20 years, firm when firmness is needed, warm when warmth is needed. And imagine her driving home one evening and catching her own reflection in the rearview mirror at a red light, and for one strange second, not recognizing the calm, composed face looking back. That is not a crisis. Jung would say, that is simply the mask doing exactly what a mask is built to do, holding steady so the woman underneath does not have to hold steady every single hour of every single day. The danger was never that she wears it. The danger would only begin if she forgot, somewhere along the way, that a woman exists underneath it, who has her own tiredness, her own opinions, her own unfinished sentences that have nothing to do with lesson plans. You do not need to burn your job down to be whole. You do not need to quit on Monday or announce some dramatic reinvention to prove to yourself that you still exist underneath the title. You need only remember, on ordinary Tuesdays, in small unremarkable ways, that the title on the door is a garment you chose to wear, not a verdict on who you are. Put it on with skill in the morning. Take it off with honesty in the evening. Ask yourself, quietly, at the end of a long day, what did I feel today that had nothing to do with my job? And if the answer is thin, let that be information rather than despair. And in between the putting on and the taking off, keep one small room of yourself that the job was never given a key to, a room where an old hobby still lives, where an unfinished thought still waits, where a version of you that never appears in any meeting is allowed to simply exist without producing anything at all. That room is where the rest of your life quietly continues, no matter what happens to the career, no matter who takes the corner desk after you, no matter what the title becomes. Your job is costing you more than it pays only for as long as you forget that a mask, however well made, however useful, however many years it has served you faithfully, was always, from the very first day you put it on, meant to come off. The mask serves me now. It does not own me. Here is the whole picture. The mask is not the enemy. Forgetting it is a mask is. Identification is the actual disease, not the role itself. The bill for an unlived life always arrives, even when it arrives late. The day the title is taken away reveals exactly how much self was left standing underneath it. The honest inventory, done gently and often, is how you keep the mask from becoming the only face you have. And underneath every mask, there is a whole undeveloped life still waiting, patiently, for you to remember it exists. All 6 of these were never 6 separate keys at all. They were 6 turns of one single key, the same key each time, turning a little further into the same door, the door between the face you show at work and the self that has been quietly waiting behind it this whole time. Your job did not ask to cost you this much. You simply forgot, for a while, to check the price. I make the unconscious conscious, and I make it conscious again tomorrow morning before I put the mask back on. Your job may have priced you without your permission, but the face underneath was never for sale, was it?